Zoogoing by Lydia Milled. The zoo was on the edge of a wide desert valley, with a view of cactus-dotted hills above, and in the flats spread out beneath, flocks of small white houses. He went there after a meeting in Scottsdale to fill an empty afternoon. He was restless in his hotel room and had seen the zoo in a tourist brochure with a picture of a wolf. In a series of arid gardens connected by pathways, there was a hummingbird enclosure and an aviary, a beaver pond, and a pool of otters. There was a Mexican parrot squawking, bighorn sheep on artificial cliffs, an ocelot curled up in a rocky crevice, and a sleek bobcat pacing restlessly. He passed a lush pollinator garden and a series of low and inconspicuous buildings. An elderly, white-haired Dawson stood with a watchful bird perched on her hand, waiting for interest. He wandered over and looked at the bird closely. It had large eyes and a beautiful face, and was compact with fierce looking. American kestrel, said the docent, one of the smaller raptures. This gal is almost 9 inches long, but weighs less than 4 ounces. Beautiful, isn't she? A few minutes later, he stood bracing himself with his hands on a low wall over a mound. Across the mound sat a black bear on a sunny ledge. This was a zoo of animals native to the region, and though bears did not live in the hot flatlands, a handful of them still roamed the piney mountains that rose above the desert floor. He had read that every so often a bear was found dead atop a power pole, where it had climbed suddenly in terror, escaping from a car or a noise, and been electrocuted. Indication of death by human activity. He watched the bear sleep, and in the lull of the sun and the heat and the stillness felt like dozing off himself. Then the stillness was disturbed by yelling boys hitting each other on the face. The father, in shorts, stood at T's elbow, looking down into his camera and adjusting a ring on the lens. A projectile, someone had lobbed a balled-up piece of litter. It hit the bear, a glancing blow on the ear, and he stirred, disoriented, turned around once, and then settled down again. Too soon. I wasn't set up yet. Missed the shot, said the man, shaking his head. Go again. The wife looked around for something else to throw, and T felt heat fill in his face. A tension bowed in him. He felt a rush of fury. Are you kidding? He asked, turning to the wife. She wore large, mirrored sunglasses. You're throwing garbage at a bear? For a picture? What's the big deal? Said the family man. Don't do it, said T. His shoulders were fluid and nervy, his face shining. He was enraged or excited, but all here he thought, and I will kill them. Even though he knew it was a posture, he felt the anger and relished it. The man shrugged, and the wife began riffling through her purse, apparently ignoring him. A few feet away, one of the flailing children, a thin boy in khaki camouflage pants, was already aloft in a second missile, a foam cup half full of brown slush. The cup missed the bear and fell into the mound below, and the slush slung out of the cup as it arced past the dimpled and dimpled the bear's dark coat. The bear reared up again, doubtly confused. The thin boy jeered. T turned to the father, who was still fumbling with his zoom length. A split second of hesitation. You let your kid do that again, I swear to God I'll grab that camera and break it open on the cement, he said. He realized his molars were grinding. He had never done this. Never anything. He was thrilled, and at the same time he hated the man, hated his wife and even his children. Mind your own business, said the family man. I'm dead serious. I'll smash it to freaking bits. I'll sue you. What are you thinking? Seriously, what does someone like you think? Do you think? Stupid bear, jeered the camouflage kid. Mind your business, said the family man. It is my business, said T. Just like it would be if you threw garbage at my sister. What don't you get about that? Is there an argument for what you're doing? Let's just go, Ray, said the wife. I got a squirt gun, said the kid, and pulled it out, the size of an assault rifle, bright pink. Don't even think about it, said T, and looked at the father. His neck tensed, his hands flexed. Tell him to put that thing away. I'll punch your face. I mean it. The man was squaring off, his eyes narrowed. He let his camera rest against his chest, the dangling lens cap swinging. Tell me how to handle my kid. He can squirt his water gun at the bear if he wants to. You disgusting piece of crap, said T. The wife tugged urgently on her husband's sleeve. Come on, Ray. After a moment, the family man turned his wife beside him and the kids ranging around them both. As they turned a corner, the kid in camouflage pants whipped around and sneered, sticking up the middle fingers of both hands before he disappeared. T felt the adrenaline surge fade, but still he burned. He wanted to hunt them down and punish them, but he did not. He did not utter a word of complaint to the zoo's management. He was flooded with elation. He was elated. This was who he was, he thought. He was a person who would defend, who would swear and threaten and feel the heat and the cliff edge of opinion. He felt good, better than good. He stood there for seconds, or was it forever? Stood there partway in rapture, struck. On its flat rock, the bear was still turning blearily round, tossing its head as though trapped in a nightmare. Finally it resettled itself and laid its chin on its paws to go back to sleep. He went back that night when the zoo was closed, thrilled as if he was lightly drunk at the illicitness in himself. It was new. What arrested him in the zoo was the wildness it contained. How far this was from the realm of his consciousness. He wanted to meet it. He knew the zoo animals lived in cages, but nothing more about them except that they were alone, most of them. Not only alone in the cages, often, but alone on Earth, vanishing. Their condition was close to what he was trying to grasp, lay somehow at the base of his growing suspicion that the ground was no longer fixed but shifting beneath him. Empire only looked good built against a backdrop of oceans and forests, It needed them. If the oceans were dead and the forests replaced by pavement, even empire would be robbed of its consequence. Alone, he thought, a word that came to him more and more and sing-song like a jeer. In the zoo, the rare animals might have been orphaned or captured or even born in captivity. He had no idea where they came from, could not know their individual histories, but he knew their position, as he knew his own. They were at the forefront of aloneness, like pioneers. They were the ones sent ahead to see what the new world was like. Would they tell what they saw? The rarest animals in the zoo was a Mexican gray wolf, the one pictured in the tourist brochure, an animal that was apparently frail and aging. Its fur looked mangy. It had been asleep when he was there earlier. The wolf's pen, as the sign posted on it told him, was a temporary setup during construction of a new exhibit. It was nothing more substantial than a chain link fence near the road with barbed wire curling along the top. He looked at his shoes, round toes. He should be able to wedge them into the holes. He shoved his flashlight in his pocket, hooked his fingers through the mesh and pulled himself up, kicking for purchase. His feet flailed against the fencing, and his fingers were already bruising, imprinted with purple lines. Speed was the key, he thought. Move quickly. He always had reasons for each single action, but he had no good reason for this. Was he irrational? But it lifted him. He would follow the question to its resolution, even if the question was unconscious. He was not even all the way up the 6-foot fence when he regretted his tactics. He had to get down from here, the pressure on the pads of his fingertips, which he feared were going to be sliced clean through. In a scramble, he grabbed the metal frame the wire was stretched on and went up and over it, catching barbs on his chest and thighs. His leg, halfway over, was tangled in the wire, and struggling, he lost his foothold. Fallen, he tried to launch himself forward, away from the barbs. When he recovered, on the ground with an aching neck and shoulder, he had a sharp pain in his leg. Sitting up, he saw he was grazed his calf on a cactus as he fell. Through the thin cotton of his pants, it was bleeding, and in the dark he could see white spines sticking through the fabric. He stood unsteadily, bracing himself against the fence. He could make out almost nothing. He walked around the cactus, lifting his flashlight. In the dark, he could imagine not only wolves, but almost anything, a secret menagerie. He was filled with the rush of this, with the idea of myriad creatures materializing from the blackness. Their coats glowed. Their faces were both benign and predatory. The faces of animals were amazing in that. Tongues of velvet and claws of ice. What were they? There was a gate, padlocked, a metal box built into the base of the fence, a dry log, a thin tree. Doves rose suddenly from the tree, a flurry of hysterical wing beats. He jumped. His leg was aching. He began to point his beam at bushes and the bases of trees where holes might be tucked. Finally, he flicked off the light and squatted down. Without the glare, his eyes adjusted, and finally he apprehended a shape that was not only a bush or tree, hunkered down against the fence, low and dim. He got up silently and picked his way closer, still without the flashlight on, his eyes on the ground while he threaded his way between bushes. Closer and closer till he pointed the flashlight towards the ground in front of the wolf's hunched shape and touched the switch with his thumb. A quick yellow flicker of eyes, and then the wolf moved fluidly, fleeing along the fence. It went away from him into a corner where it remained. He would not get closer. The wolf would not allow it. The next morning, he removed the small spines from his leg. The wound was throbbing, but he did not mind. There was something he savored in it, pinching the hair-thin fibers hard between the tweezer edges. The sensation was fine and sharp as a grass blade. It satisfied him. He took 2 aspirins and showered. In his socks and his shirt, standing in front of the in-room coffee maker, he thought of the old wolf again. Animals were self-contained, and people seemed to hold this against them, possibly because most of them had come to believe that animals should be like servants or children. Either they should work for men, suffer under a burden, or they should entertain them. He had strained against the wolf's aloofness himself, resenting the wolf for its insistence on distance. He had felt it almost as an insult, and inwardly he retaliated. But then he was self-contained too. He had a private purpose, a trajectory, and no one had license to block it. It might be obscure, even to him, but that obscurity was his own possession. The old wolf's unwillingness to be near him was fully forgiven by the light of day, and in fact the joke was on him. Weariness was simply its way of life, having nothing to do with him. It had not been robbed of this quality. Though it was caged and it was solitary, it retained its innocence, retained its essence. It did not attempt to ingratiate itself. It did not have diplomacy. He thought he recalled feeling in the flash of its eyeshine a similar flash in himself, a fleeting awareness that in the wolf's gaze there was a directness unlike the directness of men.